So Joey, thank you for joining us. First, let's just begin with I want to say thank you for coming on, and anything you want to say as far as an introduction goes.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on here. I know this is something new for you, and this is pretty cool to be a part of. Just gonna try to figure out what we're gonna talk about, and hopefully we can find some cool ideas to interest some people here.
Yeah, well, there's definitely some things I want to talk to you about because when we talk about Kumite lifestyle, so Kumite, for those I don't know, it is fighting, and you can resonate with this because you're a martial artist. So it's kind of where I want to start. So I remember meeting you kind of in passing over the years through Delaware Jiu-Jitsu, but I didn't really get to start actually knowing you till what, maybe 2, 3 years ago. I got a chance to meet your family.
Yeah.
So let's start there. What's your early account of us meeting, and what is that whole whole relationship, if you will, like how has that transpired over the last couple of
Yeah, I
years
think
to
it was
now?
actually about almost 5 years ago, bro.
Yeah.
I just did my recertification, which was 2 years of instructor
Oh wow, yeah.
certification, and then I had already been. I had my purple belt. I went through purple belt, so I didn't do my instructor certification till I was brown.
Yeah,
So actually, it's been about 4 years, and honestly,
that's
between
crazy.
the time of us meeting and the time of us being close, I don't even remember what that happened between them because I felt like it was almost instantaneous.
Yeah,
That where it was just like, hey, we're friends. That's it. It's like, it reminds me of like when you're a little kid, and you meet that kid out on the playground, maybe you get a little tussle with, you talk shit to each other, and the next thing you know, you guys are like best friends. So
yeah,
I don't think it was a very long transition between the time we met to the time we became pretty close. You're obviously a very easy person. Our personalities match really nice. And like I've told you plenty of times before that, it's easy to be playful with you. It's easy, just have a good time and almost kind of be that younger self. So
yeah.
yeah, it's been pretty cool. And it's just growing from here. And now we're doing a little podcast interview with each other. So that's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
No, dude, like it's awesome, and just kind of getting to hear your story over the last few years, whether it's from you directly or people in our inner circle, if you will. So those are some of the things that I don't think I know that the viewers at home watching this can kind of resonate with. So kind of like with whatever you're comfortable sharing. So let's kind of backtrack. So let's talk a little bit about when you started martial arts
Okay.
and kind of like the ups and downs, kind of like the timeline, if you will, and the things that you've had to overcome from a martial arts sense. Because I want that to kind of bleed over into the other facets that you do in life. But let's start there. So when you started martial arts, because from what I remember, you've been doing jiu-jitsu now for a while. And
Yeah.
of course, you've kind of seen this evolution over the last 10, 15 years or maybe more kind of happen. And now that you teach jiu-jitsu and now that your family's in jiu-jitsu, there's so much to tell. So as far as like, what can you remember from the beginning of like, what was jiu-jitsu like when you started and what is it like now?
Well, I would say so. I started in 2000, and of course that was 25 years ago. Now I haven't been doing it for that entire 25 years, and I'll get into that. But um, starting at 25 years ago, being in such a small state as Delaware, we always kind of are like, I don't want to say we're last on things, but we don't always have the same advantages as like cities like Philly or New York or other cities around us, and that goes with. And we've always dealt with that with even wrestling. They have a little bit of a bigger advantages in the sense of like clubs and all these different places that are already kind of offering these things out. So when I started in 2000, I remember telling my friends, and of course it was not long after we go to Blockbuster and you rent the UFC movies, the videos, and you'd watch UFC fights and watching Hoist do his thing, and even Frank Shamrock and Ken Shamrock, because I kind of could kind of see myself with them as well because I wrestled for so long, and just catch wrestling and stuff like that in general. And I really wanted to get into it, and I found somebody. He's a local guy, and a lot of people in Delaware know Alex,
Mm-hmm.
and he was doing it at Holy Cross. I was 18 at the time. Um, and there was me, a guy who's an awesome guy, Derek Herrera, who's actually a Special Forces guy. If you ever want to look him up, he's really, really cool. His story is really cool. And Newt, who unfortunately he's passed away at this point, and somebody else. I don't even remember who it was, but it was only like 4 or 5 of us in this in Holy Cross, which is the school, and on the stage. So it's very small. So like you're trying not to fall off the stage at the same time. And I remember telling my friends I'm doing jujitsu, and most people couldn't even pronounce it. They were like, "What is that?" And then back then, trying to explain to them, I was like, "That's just submission wrestling. Like you just wrestle and you try to get the other guy to tap out." They're like, "Oh, okay, that's cool." Nobody thought twice about it. Most people didn't even know what it was. They knew wrestling. So if I just said that, and then man, I would try to choke you while we're wrestling, and people would look at you kind of funny.
Yeah.
You tell them UFC, and back then, kids were still kind of like, I don't even know what that is. So I got into it. I really, really, really enjoyed it. Wasn't still sure about it, and we had this conversation last night about this. Is where, like I was saying, we didn't have the same advantages. So I think Alex was kind of affiliated with Balance, which was the Migliarese brothers, who are very, very good, but trying to pull techniques a little bit at a time and bring them down and show them without having that basis there made it a little bit more difficult. It was kind of like you're learning on your own. So it took a little bit longer. You make a lot more mistakes. It's a little bit more trial and error rather than having that source on hand. Fast forward, I ended up moving to Florida. Not long after I graduated, I joined the Marine Corps. I was in the Marine Corps Reserves. I was supposed to be going to school to eventually become an officer. It was terrible at school. Did not want to do that. So I ended up doing this weird split reserves, like one of the first programs I ever started. And, it was kind of weird. I had it all my summer. So I had to wait till that was kind of over. I ended up moving to Tampa to go to school for art. I wanted to do animation. Then I realized it was all computers and didn't like that. But while I was down there, I met a guy named Eduardo de Lima, who grew up not far from the Gracies in Brazil. And he kind of brought me in. He was really cool because I was poor. As I was by myself as a kid, I was kind of doing everything on my own. And even when I couldn't pay, he would yell. I remember the one time I didn't show up for a month, he got really angry at me because he's like, "Where have you been?" In his Brazilian accent and very broken English. And then he would yell at me, "You have to come in. You have to come in. Don't worry about paying." So I was like, "Okay." I didn't want to pay. I didn't have to pay all the time, which was nice. But he did it. It was in Clearwater, Florida, and it was in one of those like garages. There was no air conditioning, and it was in the middle of the summer, and it was extremely hot, but it was a good time. And there were some higher level belts there, which was really cool. So I did that for a while. Came back to Delaware, wasn't doing jujitsu. I think I went to a couple different places. Went back to Florida. Eduardo had moved. I didn't know where he'd moved yet. So then I found a place in, I think it was like Lakeland or somewhere like out that area. It ended up being like an hour away. So I started driving an hour away. I've been to so many different schools just checking them out over the years. And then stayed there for a little bit. Wasn't really like my place. Found Eduardo. He was in Tampa. I started doing with him again. And then I ended up, I had a relationship with somebody. That's why I moved back down there. And then that kind of, fizzled off. And I ended up making my way back to Delaware. And then we took a bunch of time off. And funny enough, small world, a friend of ours who is now dating a guy who's really good friend his friend is named Parker. I tattooed this guy. And this guy got me into going back to jiu-jitsu. Parker's David's friend, by the way. And he ended up getting me back into jiu-jitsu. He was like, "We got to check out this place. It's called Dauntless." And it was up in Glasgow at the time. So I was like, "Cool, we'll go up there." And mind you, I had been doing jiu-jitsu on and off, I want to say at this point it was probably 5 years. And I was still white belt. Because... And that wasn't me purposely trying to keep it or people like purposely holding me back. That was just my fault for bouncing around. They can't give you a belt like that if you're just constantly bouncing around. So I went into this place. I wasn't in shape anymore, anyways. It didn't work out very much. But of course, when I go in, even though I'm a white belt, I still got to try my hardest. I got to this because back then the mentality was like grind, 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 like a wrestling room. I go in there and I'm just working a lot of these guys that are even blue belts up to a purple belt, and they're getting like super upset, which mind you, they should be. And then they started getting mad because they're like, he's sandbagging. And I ended up having to explain to them, I've been doing it a long time. At that point, 5 years is pretty long for jiu-jitsu when you're rolling all the time. And I said, but I haven't got promoted. So I ended up being with the guy's named Alan. Long story short, that did not work out. But neither here nor there. He ended up opening up a place in Smyrna, which I kind of helped him with, taught a little bit there. I ended up getting promoted to blue belt and a purple belt pretty fast. Very unorthodox, almost like just to say, and I might catch slack for this if people hear this, but they kind of skipped blue belt right into purple belt. It was, oh, what was his name? It wasn't Alan that gave it to me. It was, I'm drawing a blank, but it was under Hickson Gracie. Luis Paris, he gave it to me. He's from Jacksonville. He did put me through a grueling test, a long test. I had to do a lot of combinations of techniques and scenarios, and I want to say it was like 2.5, almost 3 hours, and it was a lot of information. So I will say it's a little unorthodox, but I felt like I was comparable to having that belt at that time, anyways. Then I was there for a while. The guy kind of took advantage of me. I was teaching. I wasn't getting any instruction myself. I also wasn't being responsible enough to kind of figure out a way for myself to learn through somebody else or on my own accord or kind of like studying more. I wasn't in the best place at the time. Being in the Marine Corps and then going to Iraq kind of took a toll on me, which kind of made its way through over time. And believe it or not, kind of snuck in later, a little bit later on in my life, after years of ignoring it, it kind of couldn't be ignored anymore. So I ended up leaving jiu-jitsu for a while. Not too long, because then I ended up with Howard and Ronnie at the time in Delaware Combat Sports. Had fun there. I wasn't teaching there. Not until later I would help out. I was put on a contractual agreement with Alan that I could not teach anywhere for at least a year. And funny enough, he was sending people into Delaware Combat Sports to make sure that I wasn't teaching, which I wasn't. I told Howard, I said, I can't do any type of instructing whatsoever. I don't even want to be helping, just so it doesn't look like anything, because I don't want this guy trying to sue me or something.
Yeah.
So, which he was fine with. They had him and Ronnie and everybody else was more than capable of doing what they were doing anyways. So it was kind of cool. I get to sit back, I get to learn, because they were very knowledgeable as well. But I stayed there for a little bit, and then of course they had their disagreements. They did as far as things go, and I'll leave it at that for that. And when that split happened, I think it was like 7 years off. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna start fishing, and I started doing woodworking, which was cool because I made a bunch of furniture for my own house, and I got into a bunch of different things. And then long story short, I just hadn't done jiu-jitsu. My kids would come in and out of jiu-jitsu. My middle child, my oldest actually started when she was little. I was back here. It was We Warriors, is what H called it. It wasn't very long. Then my daughter Marley, started doing it a little bit here. And we still have some really old pictures of her. And some of the kids are still here when they were real little, which was cool. She kind of stopped for a little bit, and then my son came in, and he's been here ever since. But I wasn't still doing it, and I think the cool thing is he never pressured me. He'd come in, still get tattooed from me, or he'd see me because I'd bring the kids in, and he'd always, every once in a while I would say, I'd like to see you out here, when you gonna come back? But he would never really bug me about it, which was nice. Funny enough, the one person who ended up getting me to do it was Kat.
Yeah.
I was tattooing her. This is years later. And she, and we had already had friends like Al. I was tattooing, was like, why don't you come back? And I just met Al because he came through here. So he knew to come. He came to get a tattoo from me because of Howard recommending him, who's a state trooper. And I was like, yeah, one day, one day, one day. And it was long enough to where Al had just started not long when he started talking to me about that. And by the time I came in here, I think Al was a purple belt by the time I started back. And I was still a purple belt at the time. And Kat was like, you got to come in. And of course, she's like the biggest motivator ever because she's like, got to be hyped about everything. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to come in. And yeah, it was cool. So I came back uh, to complete shock. I was like, what is this?
Yeah, and just to kind of caveat off that, and I thank you for sharing
Yeah.
and just hearing that message, man. It's like you really went through the trenches as far as like the early stages of jujitsu and kind of what you thought jujitsu was at the time,
Hmm.
because everything is authentic for the time, for what it is. So whether it was in the past, the present, and of course the future, it's something that really resonated with what you're saying is I feel like when you took that time off, whether it was by accident or design, you were able to reflect on, man, like this was my journey and this was like it was authentic for what the time was. But I feel like there was a part of you that was still like you still had that itch inside of you because being an athlete, being also a competitor,
Oh, yeah.
because I also know that you wrestled as well. I can tell that jujitsu was always and still is it's a part of who you are. And something you just mentioned about when you made that transition to Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Smyrna, and you mentioned your kids too. So I know for certain your family being here has played a huge part in not only your progression, but their progression as well. But when you talk about Howard and how he never forced you to do jujitsu, let me ask you this: was that kind of a motivator in a sense where here you have an instructor, Howard, who we're talking about, you're tattooing him, which I know that you're an amazing tattoo artist, so I would love to hear that also later in the show as well. But when you have someone who's kind of at the forefront of this industry of jujitsu and he's not forcing you to do it, it's kind of like, wow, like, man, it's like there's something to be said because you were talking about how you were in situations where you felt kind of underappreciated, but now you're in a circumstance or situation where it's kind of opposite. So talk about that transition now, like being at the academy where you are, and kind of your mindset and how like just how jujitsu has really changed you for the Joey Coleman that you are now to the present date. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. 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 When I came in, it was a huge shock because I was not ready for such an organized form of any type of martial art, whether it be wrestling. Or, I don't know how karate is. So I don't want to use that as an example. Or just from my understanding of how jujitsu or wrestling or any type of grappling sport kind of was, and I was like, this is. Wait a minute. Like, wait a minute. They have like cards with classes on them, and these things, and they only do these classes. And then when I got to the mat, I'm like, this is very specific. I'm seeing posters of techniques, and I'm like what is this? So I was like really confused, and I knew like the standing techniques. That was the one big thing. That was really the only list that I remember in jiu-jitsu was the standing self techniques. Those techniques were always been, and they always are. I think they've added some on over time, but um, yeah, when I came in, and I remember I always tell the same story where I ended up partnering with Pete. It's my first day in combatives, and everything was taught so loosely, like I said before. So everything was loosely. It was kind of like left up to interpretation, which that's not how techniques are done. You know what I mean? As you get further and further and further and further into your journey, you have the ability to kind of, change slight interpretations of a technique, but you have your foundational parts of the technique that always need to be. Um, Now, when you have the principal ideas of things, then you can kind of start to play with those things. But and I hadn't had that yet. I thought I might have, but I didn't have that deep understanding, which was developed here. But I remember with Pete, I'm partnering with him, and I really wish I knew what technique it was. And it was a technique that we used to slightly do different. And I looked at Pete, and he's showing it to me. And he's not only that, so for the viewers, Pete is one of our guys who's actually going to be going through our instructor program. He's a purple belt now, but at the time he was what we call a combatives belt, um, which is for us is in between white and blue. But said, I'm a purple belt and I've been doing it for years, and he's correcting me. And of course, my ego back then was a little different. And I'm looking at him like, I'll let this go. And then I could let it go so much. And I was like, bro, why are we doing it like this? And
Yeah.
Pete looks at me and goes, I don't know, bro. That's what you just told me to do. This is how we're supposed to do it.
And I think that ability to kind of let it go, Joey, that is resilience in a sense, and that's Kumite lifestyle, meaning
Yeah.
that it can be hard to kind of change and adapt. But the whole idea of this platform is to just, it's interesting to hear that from someone that's kind of been in the trenches,
Yeah.
if you will, and to kind of just, and like I know it wasn't easy, but
No.
I would say like adapting that mindset for sure has kind of shifted you into the instructor that you are. So that's kind of where I want to go now with this. So as an instructor, not as the practitioner, which
Right.
I know you
Well, see,
are,
the thing,
are a
the point I
practitioner.
was going to get to was that and it really changed my mind, because once I did the technique the way because when Pete said that, I said, okay. So I did the technique, and then I started doing a couple more techniques, and I said, wow, now I know why we're just following what we're doing. But yeah,
Mhm.
so you want me to basically talk about how it is as an instructor?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah.
Kind of the format and kind of what made you, or kind of some of the decisions that went into that. And again, just to kind of keep it concise and simple, like what are some of the overarching things that you've learned and kind of resonated, and just, yeah, like how is jujitsu and, I'm sorry, teaching jujitsu, giving back in that sense, what has that been like for you, especially more recently, because
Oh,
you've only been,
amazing. I mean, you were actually one of my age helped me, of course, but you were one of my biggest helpers for even getting my instructor certification. I mean, you were there,
Mm.
I talk about some frustration moments to where I don't usually lose my cool. And there was a couple moments I was about ready to be like, I'm done, and it wasn't easy, but it was so purposefully, like it was so meaningful, and it was done, and it's done the way it is done for the specific reason, because it works so well. So now teaching now, I mean, it's just absolutely love it. And because that, Grace University especially gives you the building blocks to become a good instructor. Their SPF is just absolutely amazing. So it gives me the ability to kind of feel a little free in how I'm teaching and what I'm teaching, because it's all there for me.
Mhm.
Now, how like I said to you the other day, we're all getting our source from the same well, but it's really determines on who's giving you that water. So every person that's giving you that water from that same well, that same source, might be giving you in a different cup or a bowl, or however they're delivering it to you is going to be slightly different, which is really cool. And we might have different details, different add-ons, which is amazing that we have so many instructors that teach here, because like we always say, sometimes even us ourselves might teach the same technique a month later and give you slightly different details, because there's just so much to jiu-jitsu. There's so much, like H would always say with Pedro Sauer, he'd be like, just bend your pinky like this, and then your whole body does this, So you get those little things, and you have the freedom, because you have the freedom to teach, because they kind of show you how to do it so well. You have the freedom to start thinking about those things. Even when they start talking about the principles, you get to deep dive into those things. And it's just been wonderful teaching. I mean, I love the connection going around, showing people these little tricks. Because my favorite thing between adults and kids is when you get that face, when they're like, wow, or that light bulb clicks, and it just gives me chills a lot of times. It's like, wow, that's awesome. Because there's no better feeling to be able to make that connection. It's almost like having a relationship with a person every time you make those connections, or you show them something like that. Then they look at you like, man, that was awesome. And you're like, well, it's not me. It's just, this is jujitsu, But yeah, no, it's been great, and especially being able to have my kids involved, and then my son, who eventually says he wants to be an instructor, and he helps out with the kids programs too. And then I finally got my wife to do it, and she's a blue belt now. So the whole family does it. So jiu-jitsu's benefited me hugely. And just being a part of this jiu-jitsu family, Grace Jiu-Jitsu Smyrna, it's a world of difference.
I love it. And I think that's awesome now that you had that mindset, like you were saying, and now your family's involved, and
Yeah.
it's almost like they can see a different or better version of you, because
Mhm.
you've been through some of those hardships, as we talked about,
Mhm.
and more life lessons, if you will. So good. So just a couple things I just want to talk about before we wrap this up. Well, I just also want to mention that, when we talk about that growth over time and just the, ability to adapt. And I love how you shared this story about Pete,
Yeah.
how he was making that correction. And I want to believe it was coming from, a place of love,
Oh yeah, very much so. And that's the
which it
great thing
will.
about our techniques is that anybody can correct anybody because, like I said, that source is already there. So it's not like it's coming out of
Yeah.
his opinion.
Yeah, for sure. I was just going to make note of this. I feel this is very important for the viewers to hear is, and we've talked about this, a couple of times recently, and of course in the past, where when we talk about the different personalities or the different people that that you've mentioned that come into our lives, whether it's by accident or design, the one thing that's been consistent for you, or at least something that I've seen from within you, is just your ability to stay consistent.
Mhm.
And I think that's important because kind of shifting off from jujitsu, but more into the realms of, everyday life, there's a lot of things that we juggle. There's a lot of ups and downs, the chaos of life, if you will. And the thing that I've always admired about you is, like, no matter if you're having a good day or a bad day, or whatever you define a bad day as, because it's all based on
Mhm.
our own interpretation, but you're very consistent. Like, I always know that I'm going to get the same Joey, whether it's a Monday at the beginning of the month or it's a Friday at the end of the month. So what do you contribute that to? So how do you have that ability to just stay calm under pressure? Because I think that's huge, and that can resonate with in all facets of life.
I
Like, what
think
do you think?
I think well for one, the main reason is because I told you before, I give up my problems to God. Um Jesus Christ is on my side. So I had knowing that right there makes everything else that much easier. Now, is it easy? No. But I feel like God in his own way throughout my life has given me trial after trial after trial after trial for a reason. And so now I see it as a bad day would be more or less, and I try to see it. Like, I'm not perfect. I'm human. So there are times where I'm like, I'm having a bad day. But 9 times out of 10, I see it as like, well, it's just a challenge. Just a challenge. This is just, it's not a bad day. It's just, let's see how I get through this. Let's see how I deal with this. I'm always, and I'll always pray first. I talk to God about, you know, giving over these things to him and how he wants me to do this. Because there's no better way than his way anyway. So I usually will do that because and I have before, trying to deal with these things on my own, it never turned out well. It always actually was worse. It was like picking a scab,
Hmm.
and eventually it gets infected. So I learned, took me a long time, but I learned eventually that's what it was. And my family's actually coming to do the same thing. And I'd like to think that I was the example. My wife tells me that I was the example, but God used me as the example. It wasn't me or my doing. Matter of fact, when I became a Christian, I was talking to my wife about it all the time. She didn't want to hear it. She was just kind of like, get out of my ear. And then I was praying one day, and all I could hear what God say was like, get out of my way. You are in my way. It's like, stop doing what you're doing. You're not helping right now. I don't need your help for this. And he was like, just be what I want you to be and just do your thing. And I did. And believe it or not, she came around on her own accord, and he touched her heart. But yeah, I think that's it's as easy as that, but at the same time, it's not an easy journey. That's why God says, pick up your cross and follow me, because it's a heavy burden. Because the world does not like you being with him. So even in a sense, like I said, I always like to see it as a challenge. Being in the Marine Corps, I joined the Marine Corps because they said it was the hardest branch. So I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do that. I did wrestling because they said it was the hardest sport. So I did that. Anytime anybody said, well, this is going to be the hardest thing, I'm like, wow, I guess I'm going to do it. That guy's the biggest and strongest guy to roll with. Well, I guess I'll be the one to do it then. I always loved that challenge. And a lot of times it was me putting myself against them to see where I was. And if I couldn't handle it, I'd figure out a way to do it somehow or another. I remember my stepdad always said he didn't say it to me, but he said it to my mom, and it got around to my wife, who ended up telling me, and it was actually a very, very nice compliment that he gave me. And he told my mom, he goes, "Damn it," he said, "I don't know." He said, "Even if we don't agree with what the boy does," he said, "whenever he does anything and he puts his mind to it, he gets it done. He will get it done. It's 100%. And I really took that compliment to heart. And I keep that with me. But and I like to think that that's the way I am, But yeah, and I'm glad because you're kind of the same way. Where you come in, you kind of just let things go, you move on with your day, and that's one thing, especially teaching kids classes, that they need that. We don't have time to have a bad. That's not fair to them.
Yeah.
And in reality, it's not fair to anybody.
Yeah.
I never. I can understand, but I can't understand people who take out their frustrations on others. I can understand it because we're human and it happens. I can't understand it because it's very selfish.
Yeah.
Um,
And like I agree with you there, and I love that you also recognize that within myself because I recognize that in you, and that's kind of the characteristic. That's kind of why I believe we have the bond that we do. And I just want the viewers to know, or anyone listening to this, if you're a coach or a mentor or even just a parent, like there's going to be times where you're going to have to like literally fake it. Meaning like it's sometimes hard to turn off you know, those extracurricular emotions, if you will. But
mhm.
when you're in the forefront, or if you have an opportunity to be around kids or help mentor or just students in general, especially what we do, it's like you don't have a choice. It's either you
Yeah.
show up or you don't. So I definitely agree with you there. And
Yeah, like H says, he's like, if you can't turn it off, then don't teach.
yeah,
Yeah, don't do that because you never know whose day you're gonna ruin
for
just by
sure.
having not a good face on.
Yeah.
You know.
So one last thing. So because you are a jujitsu instructor
hmm
and you're kind of juggling a lot of different things in your life, but kind of in the realms of what we do.
hmm
And one of the things that I've learned about being a jujitsu instructor is like we're not just teaching techniques. I mean that's what most people think we do. It's kind of like
Yeah.
that picture where people think this is what most people think we do. This is what we actually do.
Yeah.
But
Oh yeah, especially like
yeah,
we've heard comments to where it's like, "Hey, I could do that. You guys just watch the video and then teach it." I'm like,
yeah, it's crazy.
it's exactly what we do. Yeah, go, if that's the case, go watch a John Danaher video, and then go teach it in a deep way to where you can fully understand or explain why they're doing everything. So if somebody asks you 5 million questions about the technique, you better be able to answer all 5 million of them.
Should be able to. I
Yeah,
know. Yeah. So it's crazy even within our own industry how that
yeah.
is still still relevant or it's still happening. But no, I just wanted to kind of ask you this. So because you're an instructor, do you ever find yourself being more than just a just instructor? Maybe you're a quote unquote therapist. Have students ever come up to you, or has anyone ever presented like any of their life challenges? So without getting personal, how do you deal with that? Because we are kind of ambassadors for jujitsu, but as
hmm
instructors, people look at us in a different light. And bro, I got to be honest, for me, that was one of the toughest things that I had to adapt and overcome. So when we talk about being resilient, it's not just us, it's also being resilient for other people that are, trusting in us to not just teach them techniques, but the mindset. So if you have a story or I'm sorry, like if you have a story or anything or like a message that you can convey to the audiences at home, if you're in a position where you're helping or instructing, what's the message there? Like how can you help both on and off the mat?
Yeah,
Or
I would say find a boundary there, though.
yeah,
That's clear. Find a boundary. How far you let somebody talk to you about their problems.
yeah,
We aren't therapists. Um, we don't know the entire story. Anytime anybody talks to you, anything, anyways, like even it could be a good friend, you're not always going to get the full story. So you have to be careful about advice giving. But just listening to somebody is not a problem. Now, if it's something that you're familiar with or a person you're familiar with and you're familiar with the situation, there is one person that has talked to me many times before.
hmm
Not going to give up their name, but
sure,
they have their issues as far as emotional wise, and I can connect with that person a little bit. So I don't have no problem talking with them. They're pretty. We're also close enough to we can do that, and I don't have to worry about those boundaries not being held. Um, but yeah, I think there's times where we need to talk to our students about certain things if they're feel comfortable with talking to you. But like I said, I feel like there needs to be a boundary too because we don't want to give them the wrong impression that we can help them in everything in their life. Um, but it can be difficult sometimes to not, because honestly, as an instructor, as a good instructor, you should have already that caring feeling about people. You should care that they're learning. You should care that they're getting the techniques. You should care that they're being safe with each other. You should care that they're having good partners. You should care that they're having fun. You should be so caring about all of these things because that's what you're there for. And sometimes that caring sometimes goes on off the mat too much. So sometimes we have to kind of reel that in, but at the same time, there's nothing wrong with it being off the mat at the same time, building relationships. But I know some instructors that I've met and through the years just said, don't try to be friends with everybody. Like you can be their instructor and be friendly, but off the mat, you can't always like try to have a relationship with every single person because it's going to become too difficult. And then people are going to start confiding in you in things that maybe you don't want to have any business of. But yeah, the one person I know for a fact that has confided in me, there was no problem with that, and it's kind of nice to see this person kind of feel like changed, to feel different. I mean, they still have their thing. We all do. Sometimes it doesn't go away. Sometimes it takes a long time, but I know that it wasn't just with me, but H has dealt with this person too, and this person went from like not wanting to be involved other than a very personal, private way to being involved with groups and so forth, so forth. So it's been pretty awesome to watch. The biggest thing is just watching. We have a lot of kids with autism in our kids classes, and man, I was talking to somebody today about that. And watching those children, I think that's where it really comes into hand. It's watching those kids bloom. It's so amazing. I remember the one kid, I forget his name, Jude, my son, was actually in Cub Scouts with him at the time. But I remember he would wear the like the hearing protection.
I know you're talking about, yeah.
And he was out there and he'd wear it. And I want to say it was only like 2 weeks later after doing classes. He comes up to me, he's like, "Can you hold these?" And I was like, "Oh, sure, buddy." And his mom looks over and I see her face like, "What?" He just took it off. And I was like, "Yeah, it was pretty cool."
So the overarching theme is this, right? So everyone wants to be heard.
Yeah.
And people don't care. Like people don't care what you know until they know that you care. So I
Yeah,
think
exactly. Yeah, that's good, as well said. Yeah.
I think that's been like the whole premise of what you were just saying. And like I thank you for sharing that component because I think that's big, for in this particular case, because you are a husband, a father, and you have an opportunity to mentor the next generation, if you will, having those core values or having those values and like you said, that boundary already set in place, that's huge in my opinion.
Yeah.
So listen, Joey, I want to thank you so much for coming on to today's show. Is there any last minute things or like any shout outs or where can people find you? Because I know you're a tattoo artist, so maybe the next couple minutes talk about that, where they can locate you.
Yeah, I'm at Walls of Wonder. My Instagram is Joey C Tattoo. You can go on there. I have all my tattoos. Right now I got tattoos and family pictures scattered together. I'm going back to start to relearn this social media stuff. I'm not very good at it. So I'm going to start putting albums so they can just see just the tattoos. I'm going to have a QR code at the shop as well. I think I'm going to bring a QR code in here if H is cool with that. But yeah, you guys can hit me out on Instagram if you want. I do pretty much anything and everything between Japanese, portraits, black and gray, realism, regular black and gray, tattoos. I'm not picky. I'll do the smallest thing to the biggest thing. So
I also want to fill in too, because Joey is an amazing jiu-jitsu instructor and we live in this digital world. If you're ever interested in doing maybe a private lesson over Zoom, I think that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. Over Zoom. I never thought about that. Over Zoom, that'd be cool.
Yeah, just more opportunities though, for sure.
Or if you guys would like to come in here and then sign up too at Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Smyrna.
Yep. Here in Delaware.
We always need more people.
Absolutely. So Joey, again, man, thanks again for your time. I loved hearing your story and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Awesome, buddy. Thank you, man.